as I was growing up, I was always fascinated. I always loved documentaries. Used to love all the kind of weird and wonderful strands that they used to be on TV that I would watch. That would be all a bit late, late at night. It would be. I was always obsessed with like travel logs or things that took you to other places around the world that just felt unfamiliar. So that was always kind of where I was interested in, or other cultures or other people, just other people's lives. I just always really loved. So it'd always been something that I'd kind of aspired to do, but never quite knew how to get in, because all of this was predating things like social media platforms, where nowadays if you're coming out of university, you can go on Facebook and there's 8 million groups to get into film and television, and there's much more of a documented pathway as to how you get in. And I think probably back in the day when I started off, it was all a bit more mysterious, and you had to come in a kind of traditional trajectory of getting into a company and starting at the bottom and working your way up type of thing. Because when I started in 2004, it was really only a couple of years later that you were starting to get smaller cameras that were coming out that were much more easier to use, that were less expensive, that companies were happy for you to take for the weekend, for example. So that was why I kind of learned on the job. Prior to that, I had actually gone to art school and dropped out. So I had a background, I could do photography, so I didn't come to it with no experience at all. I was familiar with framing and apertures and all that kind of stuff. So I knew the basic semantics of how to work a standard camera. So it wasn't that big a leap for me to then do a little bit of self-shooting. But yeah, when I first started in TV, there was quite a lot of big cameras being used, and yeah, you just wouldn't have got to take one of them home. I wouldn't have got to take that home and play around with it or have it for a weekend. But once the small cameras started to come in that were kind of relatively inexpensive for companies to buy, then that was when you saw the kind of advent of a lot more self-shooting, and that was probably the start of it, where you had a lot more people that if you were coming in as assistant producer, you had to probably self-shoot. So yeah, I learned on the job, and to be honest, I've done a few courses myself, but there's nothing like learning on the job, because with the best will in the world, you can go and do a course and it can give you the basics, but it's not till you're in a situation where you're filming something and then you're thinking, okay, I need to work out how I'm covering this. If there's only me here, how am I covering the unfurling action? And that you just get through experience and practice on the job. So I kind of think things have evolved so much these days that you can shoot stuff with your mobile phones, so again, people can practice things with the means that they've got available to them, because it's all the same principle. It's as much about juggling, making sure you get everything in focus, and then still trying to engage with whoever your participants are. So yeah, learn on the job in that. I think when I started again, because there weren't as many means for you to show your kind of creative visual style. When I first started, you didn't have platforms like YouTube and stuff that you could go and put things up on and be the master of your own destiny, as it were. So I suppose in a way that because of that, I had to do a more traditional trajectory, and a more traditional trajectory as you come into a TV company. You start as a researcher, then you move up to being an assistant producer, and then you're learning your craft of your compliance and all the other things that come with producing in terms of just managing, keeping things on schedule, all that kind of stuff. And I think when I was doing it, it was easier. People gave you more responsibility as a producer, because obviously there was still somebody else there in charge of the visuals. So I kind of I moved up that rung first probably, and then started to then say, look, can I direct? Can I do this? But I always asked, when I was in the first company, I used to ask, could I sit in and understand what the production manager did or what the production coordinator did? Because for me, I always just thought, if I keep moving up and I get to the top of the tree at one day, for me, I think for you to understand really what everybody's role is in a team and really understand what people contribute, then to me it's kind of well, I should have sat in their shoes or walked in their shoes, or sat at their desk, as it were, and worked out what's it like to work out how you manage 1,000 receipts when people bring it back and they're all disorganised, and how annoying that is. I tried to do some of the different roles, not because I was ever going to apply for all those different roles, but just to get a sense of what was involved in those different roles. Because again, much like jumping in and out of the world of development and production, if you just work in development for years and you never go on production, sometimes you can develop ideas that actually aren't that practical, because you don't understand that what you're pitching is not actually practical in real life, and vice versa. So I kind of think if you just stay your whole time in production, you don't necessarily understand the semantics of what needs to go on in development. And so I've always been lucky enough to be able to dip between both. Sometimes because I worked in companies that were small enough that they didn't have big teams, so you kind of had to be almost a jack of all trades, master of none, if you want to call it that. Because that's kind of what was required. But actually, I think as I've gone through the industry, I've realised that kind of trajectory just happened for me. I didn't plan it that meticulously, but I realised that as I moved up the rungs, as it were, I thought actually that's been a really beneficial thing to do, because I've got a bit of an understanding from both sides of the coin. And then also from a practical level, when I left jobs that were permanent positions and went into the freelance world, actually I realised that served me really well, because it gave me two options to work in both production and development. Because as we know, production tends to be seasonal, not quite the right word, but it's certainly a bit more erratic in terms of, there'll be fallow periods during the year that there won't always be as much work around. So having the ability to do development was always useful in television. And then if you want to move into film or make your own docs for film festivals, then I think in the early stages, it's really good to have an understanding just broadly of all those roles, because until you get to the stage where you've got more experience or you get more funding or whatever else, you probably have to do a little bit of all those roles yourself. It never does anybody any harm to understand the semantics of like what it takes to do clearances for music or what it takes to get clearances for archive or whatever else. I mean, there are some elements of the job that are less exciting than others, but it's all part and parcel of it. You kind of have to work out, you have to know some of it to at least understand what you're capable of doing creatively. So yeah, that's kind of how I looked at it. And I just always thought, well, it just lets me get a sense of it. And honestly, once you've done 1,000 receipts, you realise how crap that is, then you've got a newfound respect for your production managers. You're like, oh my God, now I know why they're annoyed. Because it is really tedious when people just give you a load of stuff back and you're like, so there's no notes with any of this, it's just a sift through. So yeah. So that's why. Yeah, I mean, I think certainly for docs or something like that, like there's a ton of companies in Cardiff nowadays, or across Wales, that are easy to find online. And so, as I said at the beginning, I think like if you're interested in a particular area or something, I just think work out what documentaries you're drawn to watching. For example, what do you enjoy? What is it about them? What is it about the stories that you want to do? And set yourself a target of kind of saying, well, right, if I want to try my hand at that, or for example, like for some people when they come into factual, they think maybe I want to try factual, maybe I want to try factual entertainment, because factual entertainment by and large, usually you've got longer runs because there tend to be series, so it's better in terms of more stability. Docs tend to be by and large single. You do get series, but again, not as many down here, but you do get them. So I think just try and work out what interests you in a story. What kind of style of doc are you attracted to? I'm quite interested in docs that take apart the form of documentary telling, as you say, that don't take a traditional trajectory. So something like Casting John Bonet that's on Netflix, I absolutely adored when it first came out, because you kind of get a sense of like what a great way to tell a story through a different prism of making it again something that was really visual, something that was really beautiful, something that was really engaging and powerful, but it didn't take a normal trajectory and it was much more creative. So it can be something like that, and if that's the case, then find the company that aligns most with your values and then try and see if you can get your hand in there in some way, shape or form. And I think in terms of, or if you want to just go on production and and if you think you want to do research, I would say by and large, if you want to go into development, then it would be good to try and get a sense of, when you go for an interview for development, people are going to say to you, okay, what have you watched? What did you like? What did you like about that program? So have a think about a couple of examples that you think, right, I love First Dates for this reason, or I love this particular program for that reason, and really do a post-match analysis when you're watching those programs in terms of like, what is it that works about them? What is it that doesn't work about some of the programs? But a big part of your job in development is to be analytic about what's been on, analytical about what's been on TV, what works, what hasn't worked, looking at comparisons, looking at, what was not right with that, was the music not right with that, was the tone not right with it, did it take too long to tell you that dull bit that you didn't need, or and I think people are going to ask for your opinion, so it's good to prepare yourself for thinking like, okay, I'll get myself familiar with the landscape. Understand in your own head, what are you driven, like what are you passionate about? Because the other thing that I think people care about is passion. Like you come into this industry, and as I say, there's 1,000,001 faces trying to get in the door. If you can find somebody that can cut through the enthusiasm and with passion that actually care about stuff, and by and large, a lot of telly's problem solving. So if you can come in and somebody throws something at you, and you will get that thrown at you when you come in those early jobs, and you can work out, okay, I need to get this done and I need to find the fastest way of getting it done, then those skills are hugely valuable. And one of the other things I would say that I have noticed myself, as the kind of shift in generations of researchers come through, I think you have to be mindful of if you're coming into the world of television, is that you're going to be dealing with a lot of people from a whole host of different age ranges, some of whom are going to be very different in terms of outlook, perspective, reliance on technology, etc., etc. So you have to kind of adapt and be mindful of what you're dealing with as well. So I would say that those things are worth being mindful of. But equally, and if you can't do that, check out all the schemes. Don't be afraid of writing to people and asking. Don't be afraid of sending around your CV. As I say, tailor things. Just try and make it yourself as appealing as you can so that people are less likely to refuse you. And there are lots of jobs in terms of, even just if you're not interested, even just doing, I did a few days running, I think, when I started out on a drama as well, just to get a sense of like, how does that all work? Because there was a lot of roles that I thought, I don't even know what that means. I don't know what that person does. And so even just getting into that, because it gets you a bit of cash. Yeah, it's long days, but you'll make connections with people. And again, if you make connections and you do a good job and somebody thinks, actually, you know what, that runner was really good, they'll be more inclined to go, okay, well, if you're around next week, we're going to be doing another day or whatever. Once you're in, it's so much easier to stay in than it is just constantly knock on the door. And so I think be as innovative as you can is what I would say in terms of reaching out. You need tenacity more than anything else in this industry, because there's so many hurdles along the way. And I still would argue that this is the best job in the world. Like, I wouldn't ever trade it for anything, because it takes you into worlds and takes you into places that ordinarily I would never get to speak to particular people, whether that be abroad or here or whatever. It varies every day. It's exciting to do. You can make okay money at it as you move up the chain. But I think tenacity, and also, I guess, empathy, because, you know, if you genuinely are interested in people and you want to tell people stories or you want to engage them, I think like that there's sometimes there are companies that haven't always been authentic with people, and I think that people can usually, when you speak to people get a sense of whether actually in your heart of hearts you really want to do this and what you're saying is actually truthful. Somebody once said to me when I first came into telly, if you treat everybody that you meet as if it's your mum and dad, imagine how you'd want your mum and dad to be spoken to, or your gran to be spoken to, when you go in and speak to participants. And I think it's sometimes easy when you get into a job to get stuck in a trajectory of just thinking, oh, that's a participant. And actually what you have to remember is it's a human being. So imagine somebody was coming around and saying that same thing to your mum and dad or your gran or whoever. And I think just like, yeah, just treat people with respect. And, you know, and stick to your word, because you know what? Your word is your bond. Like, all you've got is your word in this game, and you're only really ever as good as your last production, your last thing that you've done. And people will check out who you are, and they'll check out like, well, did she keep her word? Did she do that? Did they do whatever? And I kind of think like, if you can stick to doing that and you can be tenacious and just have to pick yourself up and think, okay, well that didn't work, but I'll find another way. And for me, like when I changed career, people told me I was bonkers to do that, because I'd reached a stage in my career where I was earning good money and I had things to do, and I just thought, well, I want to give this a go because that's what felt like where my heart belonged, and I'm really glad that I did it. And everybody said, oh, it's not an easy industry to get into, and I think, yeah, it isn't, but you know what, if you really want it, you'll find a way in. And I kind of think there are so many more pathways in now that it is so much easier, because there is a lot of information out there and there's a lot more people that you can reach out to in the first instance. And by and large, most people will offer some help. There's lots of sessions online, you can watch lots of things, but yeah, just be tenacious. And I think if you want to really find it, you'll find a way forward. There is always a way through. There is, you just have to be you have to think slightly outside the box.